In 2025, New York Times' Ross Douthat was interviewing a Silicon Valley Superman, and we saw this moment.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know. I would.
This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions.
That Silicon Valley Superman is Peter Thiel, a longtime Republican donor and a key figure in American right-wing politics. His fixation on the Antichrist has drawn a lot of criticism, but very few cross the Rubicon of headlines and onto what the man actually believes. Stay with us because today, you'll know who Peter Thiel actually is. Let's start in the summer of 1998. During that time, a Stanford PhD student named Max Levchin gave a lecture on cryptography. In the audience was a young hedge fund manager with a philosophy degree and a law career he'd already walked away from. That student was Peter Thiel. The two started talking about encryption and digital money, and within weeks, Thiel had funded Levchin's idea, a way to beam payments between Palm Pilots. That company became PayPal. Thiel then served as CEO through PayPal's chaotic early years along with Elon Musk. Fraud attacks, a dot-com crash, regulatory fights, and steered it to a public offering and, in 2002, a $1.5 billion sale to eBay. The alumni of that company went on to build Tesla, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Yelp, and were called by Fortune magazine the PayPal Mafia. 2 years after the eBay sale, Thiel wrote a $500,000 check to a scrappy startup called The Facebook, becoming its first outside investor for a 10.2% stake. He'd eventually sell most of that position for over $1 billion, but by then, he'd already turned to something bigger. By 2012, Thiel was teaching a class on startups at Stanford. A student in the room, Blake Masters, took such detailed notes that they became a book, 0 to 1, published in 2014, now one of the most read texts in Silicon Valley. Its central argument runs against everything taught in a standard economics course. Competition, Thiel writes, isn't the engine of a healthy market. It's actually a trap. He points to the airline industry. Hundreds of billions in sales, razor-thin profits, companies fighting each other into exhaustion. Then he points to Google, a fraction of the revenue but a near-total lock-on search and the profit margins to fund self-driving cars and life extension research on the side. His conclusion is, don't try to win a competition. Try to make competition irrelevant. Build something so novel, so far ahead of the next best alternative that you simply have no rivals. That's what he calls a creative monopoly. The book also lays out what became his signature interview question for founders. What important truth do very few people agree with you on? That question is a search for contrarian conviction, the idea that the biggest returns come from being right about something almost everyone else dismisses. That instinct, trust the unpopular idea, build the thing nobody else believes in, is the through line connecting the investor who bet on Facebook before anyone else would, the founder who bet Silicon Valley's fraud detection tools could catch terrorists, and later, the political donor who bet on outsider candidates named Trump and J.D. Vance before either man looked like a winning bet at all. In 2003, 2 years after the September 11th attacks, Thiel co-founded a company called Palantir Technologies, named after the all-seeing stones in Tolkien's fiction. The idea was to take the fraud detection software PayPal had built to catch criminals moving money and repurpose it to help intelligence agencies find terrorists moving through data. Most venture capitalists passed. The CIA's own investment arm, In-Q-Tel, didn't. Most venture capitalists didn't understand that Palantir wasn't built to sell software to consumers. It was built from day one to sell the government the ability to see patterns humans couldn't see on their own, and Thiel has chaired the company ever since. The sole existence of Palantir is evidence of Thiel's philosophy of the creative monopoly logic from his own book To the Business of State Power. Build a thing no government agency can easily replace and let dependency do the rest. Now let's look deeper into Palantir. Palantir earned $687 million from U.S. government contracts in the first quarter of 2026 alone. The defense firm Anduril, belonging to the Thielverse, signed a 10-year, $20 billion contract with the Army. Palantir's own federal footprint now spans the Pentagon, ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, and, more controversially, the IRS, where the company is reportedly involved in discussions about the centralized database linking tax and social security records. Tax policy experts warn tax notes that heavy reliance on a single vendor, quote, creates problems of financial dependency, technical lock-in, and real risks to democratic accountability. cautioning that once an agency becomes dependent on one contractor, that contractor gains leverage the public never voted to give it. Palantir and its CEO, Alex Karp, reject the surveillance framing directly. Karp told the New York Times Dealbook Summit his company is highly ethical and drew a sharp line. Palantir's software can process data on people who are already under legal surveillance, he said, but the company itself is not building a database that can be used for surveillance. Critics countered that the distinction is thinner in practice than in principle, but it's worth stating plainly that Palantir denies the surveillance company label its critics apply to it. However, the pattern isn't unique to Washington. In the UK, Palantir's National Health System data platform and a Ministry of Defense deal have drawn similar questions in Parliament about no-bid contracting, questions the UK government has maintained were handed fairly. Are you finding Peter Thiel's story interesting or useful? Well, let us know in the comment section below, and take a second to drop a like and turn on the notification bell so you know as soon as we drop a new video. To understand why Thiel builds what he builds, it helps to go back to a single essay he wrote in 2009, years before most Americans had heard his name. Titled The Education of a Libertarian and published by the Cato Institute, it laid out a worldview that would quietly shape the next 2 decades of his career. Thiel's core claim was blunt. He no longer believed freedom and democracy were compatible. The task facing libertarians, he wrote, was to find, quote, an escape from politics in all its forms, a way to build wealth and technology outside the reach of majority rule altogether. He pointed out 2 frontiers where that escape might happen: cyberspace and the open ocean, where he went on to personally fund an engineer's attempt to build floating, self-governing platforms free of any nation's laws, a project known as seasteading. One line in that essay drew the sharpest backlash. Thiel wrote that the expansion of the welfare state and, specifically, the extension of the franchise to women had made the idea of capitalist democracy into what he called an oxymoron. When the essay set off a public firestorm, Thiel published a follow-up clarifying his position. He wrote that it would be absurd to suggest that women's votes will be taken away, and stated plainly that he didn't believe any class of people should be disenfranchised. His point, he said, was a statistical observation about voting patterns, not a policy proposal. There's a live debate about how to read all this. Some commentators called it a straightforward case against democracy itself. Others described Thiel's position more precisely as post-democracy rather than anti-democracy. The argument, as one analysis puts it, is that mass politics driven by outrage and short-termism can be trusted to protect the very freedoms that make prosperity possible, without that necessarily meaning he wants one-man rule. Whichever reading you find more persuasive, the essay's broader argument proved consequential. Commentators have since traced a direct line from its ideas to the Doge-era push to shrink federal agencies nearly 2 decades later. That philosophy didn't stay on the page, though. Thiel was one of the earliest and most prominent Silicon Valley figures to back Donald Trump in 2016, at a time when most of the tech industry kept its distance. He also funded and mentored a young venture capitalist and author named J.D. Vance years before Vance became a senator and then vice president. Along the way, he backed other political newcomers, including Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, betting early on candidates who shared his skepticism of centralized institutions. Tech commentators have noted that Thiel's political style is different from some of his peers. Where Elon Musk's political involvement has played out loudly and publicly, Thiel has operated with far less visibility, while Palantir's stock rose sharply through the current administration's first years. That 2009 dream of an escape from politics didn't stay theoretical either. It found a modern architecture and a specific philosopher to go with it. That philosopher is Curtis Yarvin, a software engineer who wrote many years ago under the pen name Mencius Moldbug. Since the mid-2000s, Yarvin has argued that democracy is a failed experiment and that government should instead be run like a corporation, with a single CEO-style executive answerable to shareholders rather than voters, what he calls neocameralism. Journalists who cover this world have described Yarvin as the informal house philosopher of a network of tech billionaires that includes Thiel, and Yarvin himself has said Thiel is fully enlightened. Thiel's venture firm was an early investor in Urbit, Yarvin's own software project. Yarvin is also the developer of a concept called the network state, the idea that instead of trying to reform existing countries, aligned communities should build their own parallel societies online first and seek sovereign territory later. Thiel is among the backers of Praxis, a startup pursuing exactly that vision, which raised $525 million in 2024, aiming to build what its founders call a new city from the ground up. Critics see a direct line from Yarvin's blog to real capital and real political influence. J.D. Vance has cited Yarvin as an intellectual influence, and Yarvin was reportedly treated as an informal guest of honor at a 2025 Trump inaugural event. Here, the story turns strange. Starting in the fall of 2025, Thiel began delivering a private, sold-out 4-part lecture series at San Francisco's Commonwealth Club. The subject, the Antichrist. By the summer of 2026, that private lecture tour had become something more formal. A published theological argument co-authored with Sam Wolf in First Things, the leading journal of American Catholic intellectual conservatism. Thiel's essay draws heavily on a Russian philosopher named Vladimir Solovyov, who in 1900 imagined the Antichrist not as a monster but as a brilliant, well-meaning administrator, a man who wins the world's affection with promises of peace before he even asks for its submission. Thiel and Wolf argue the same pattern is playing out now, a coming figure who will justify sweeping global authority not through force but by pointing to real fears: climate change, artificial intelligence, nuclear war, and offering coordinated worldwide management of the danger. The essay coins a specific term for people it says are unknowingly building the infrastructure this figure would need: Legionnaires. Thiel names climate activist Greta Thunberg and AI safety researcher Eliezer Yudkowsky as examples, not, he's careful to say, because they intend harm, but because their calls for global treaties and coordinated AI oversight are, in his reading, laying groundwork for centralized control. Recent reporting indicates Thiel has extended this argument even further, suggesting Pope Leo XIV's own openness to AI regulation could make the Pope himself an unwitting vehicle for the same dynamic. To understand where this ideology actually comes from, it helps to go back to Stanford in the late 1980s, where an undergraduate Thiel took a course from a French literary critic named René Girard. Girard spent most of his career at Stanford building a single, sweeping theory: that human desire is imitative, not original. We want things because we see other people wanting them, and that this imitation breeds a rivalry so corrosive that societies have historically resolved it by uniting against a single, blamed figure: a scapegoat. This was fundamental for Thiel. He later credited Girard directly with his decision to become an investor, and specifically with his reading on Facebook, a company he saw less as a product people wanted it on its own merits and more as a machine for spreading imitative desire itself, people joining because other people were joining. The friendship outlasted the classroom. Thiel spoke at Girard's memorial service when he died in 2015, and 0 to 1 is threaded with Girardian ideas about rivalry and imitation throughout, even where Girard isn't named. In the summer of 2004, Thiel took the Girard connection to a Stanford symposium called Politics and Apocalypse, delivering a talk called The Straussian Moment that tried to fuse Girard's theory of mimetic rivalry with the work of 2 right-wing political philosophers in vogue that year. That's the direct intellectual through-line to the First Things essay 22 years later. A belief that societies manage escalating rivalry through unifying mechanisms, and that the modern world's version of those mechanisms, mass movements, global institutions, calls for unity against a shared threat, deserve the same suspicion Girard applied to ancient scapegoating rituals. It's worth taking the argument seriously rather than dismissing it outright. The Solovyov text Thiel cites is real, underread, and genuinely about the danger of evil that arrives looking like virtue rather than menace. Fortune's own analysis, after laying out the theological case in detail, concluded there's no reason to think the theology is insincere. But Thiel's reading of his own mentor isn't uncontested. Girard was, by most accounts, a Catholic pacifist chiefly concerned with warning people against scapegoating, and critics argue Thiel's version quietly drops that humility. Before drawing any conclusion, it's worth hearing out the strongest version of the opposite case, because a fair number of serious people make it. Start with the track record: PayPal's fraud detection potential and SpaceX's viability before almost anyone else did. Whatever else is true, the man has been a contrarian and correct more often than most investors in Silicon Valley history. The Thiel Fellowship, launched in 2011, has paid over 1,000 young founders $100,000 each to skip or leave college and build companies instead, a program its defenders call a genuine bet on merit over credentialism, not merely a stunt. On the free speech question specifically, Thiel's defenders point to a real, if selective, consistency. He came out publicly as gay at the 2016 Republican National Convention in front of a party platform that was actively hostile to same-sex marriage, a genuinely uncomfortable, non-strategic thing to do in that room. And on the post-democracy reading of his politics, defenders argue Thiel's actual public record shows no support for ending elections in the United States. His objection, they say, is to what he sees as short-term, outrage-driven governance, not to voting itself, closer to a warning about democratic dysfunction than a blueprint for replacing it. However, none of this erases the material in the chapters before it, but it's a fair account of why Thiel retains serious defenders and not just critics, and why, 20 years into his influence over Silicon Valley and Washington alike, the debate over what he actually wants remains genuinely unsettled among people who've studied him closely. Did you know Peter Thiel's story, or were you, just like many, also bombarded by the thousands and thousands of headlines? Whether you agree or not with him, now that you know, let us know in the comment section. Because for us, it's not about selling you an ideology, but for you to garner through facts and stories the strength to decide for yourself. That's our core mission. We are Big Picture Originals, a brand powered by Brazil Paralelo, driven by a small team that seeks to bring to you high-quality productions that connect audiences with the culture, history, and values that give purpose to life. To achieve our goal, every kind of support means the world. So, if you feel related and you enjoyed this video, drop a heart like, let us know your opinion in the comments, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with anybody that you feel might appreciate it. And if you want to get early access to our releases, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen right now. See you in our next brief.